Hello. Thank you for being here this evening. Tonight, we're going to take a trip back in time to the early years of Crystal Lake Resorts from the late 1880s to about 1915. This was the golden age of Crystal Lake Resorts, at least one of them. We'll be taking a virtual trip around the lake on an old steam launch. On the way, we will visit many of the early resorts. We won't be able to cover every resort, and some have already been covered in previous lectures. But we will see some interesting places on our journey. This is the story of pioneers and entrepreneurs who came to this area to build their dream. This lecture is dedicated to their memory and their stories. Before there were resorts, if you wanted to see this area, you might be holding one of these, a pocket map, the Tourist Pocket Map of Michigan, published by S. Augustus Mitchell in 1835. This is how Michigan looked on paper before the Treaty of Washington in 1836, when 12 million acres of northern Michigan were purchased from indigenous communities in a deal brokered by Henry Schoolcraft. As you can see in this close-up, little was known about our area, including Crystal Lake. However, we do see Gravelly Point identified, aka Point Betsy, and the River Betsy's. After statehood in 1837, the area was officially surveyed by Alvin and Albert Burt in 1838 and 1839. Note that the lake was referred to as Cap Lake back then, likely named for the whitecaps that are so common here. This map from 1860 by Sage and Sons was the first to identify Crystal Lake. The map shows the original shoreline prior to the lowering in 1873. It also shows our first road from Frankfort to Traverse City, highlighted here in red. By the 1880s, there were more roads, although most were just two tracks at best. Still, there was no road around the lake. Here we see the courthouse on Homestead Road. The county seat was moved from Frankfort to Benzonia in 1872 and then moved back to Frankfort in 1895. In the late 1880s, two major developments occurred that paved the way for the new resort era. The first was the arrival of the railroad in 1889. The second was the establishment of Crystal City and the Beulah View Resort in 1890. The town was founded by Reverend Charles Bailey, who also helped found the village of Benzonia in 1858. In this close-up of the original plat map, note the location of the first train station in the corner of Beulah Park. Here is a photo of that early train station and the area that was set aside for the park. The first hotel in Beulah was called the Van Winkle Hotel, built in 1893. It was located across from the park and close to the train station. Unfortunately, it burned in 1898, but by then other hotels began to open. The White Hotel was built on the beach across from the park sometime around 1900. Within a decade, it was purchased by local merchant Frank Orcutt. The hotel was then expanded with a large veranda, as shown here, and renamed the Crystal Inn. Later, it was renamed the Northway Hotel, which operated up until the 1950s. Looking at this 1901 plat map of Beulah Resort, we can see the proximity of the park, the depot, the White Hotel, and a boathouse. In this photo, you can see this boathouse along with the hotel and the park on the right. If we zoom in further, we can see the Hotel Maze, which was built around 1900. Today, it is known as the Cold Creek Inn. The boathouse was the enterprise of Alfred E. Terpening, established as Terpening's Pavilion in 1901. Terpening worked for the Western Union Telegraph Company and lived in Grand Rapids. This was a summer business for him, along with his wife Laura and their 7 children. Terpening's, or it was often called Terps, was mostly known as a boat livery, but it was also much more. When you go boat riding, or fishing, or camping, or bathing, or have a dance, go to the boat livery and pavilion run by A.E. Terpening, Beulah. Later, Terpening added a bowling alley and an ice cream stand, all running full blast. Boats and launches are being overhauled and ready for the season's business. Terpening sold out in 1917, but the pavilion was expanded many times over the years, as seen in this photo. So, are we ready to go for a boat ride? Okay, let's get on board the outing and take a trip around Crystal Lake. Before or while we're boarding, let's get some background on the outing and her sister ship, the Crystal. From the Benzie Banner in 1901 and 1902, the steamer outing is a beauty, 40 feet overall, 8 feet 4 inches beam, 4 feet deep. She will seat 50 people around her. Her hull is Bessemer sheet steel. This is the first time Crystal Lake has had such a good boat, or one that had a licensed engineer. The following year, Terpening added the Crystal, an even larger boat. 46 feet 6 inches overall, she can easily seat 100 passengers. Licensed to carry 150 pounds of steam, and will give the boat a guaranteed speed of 10 miles per hour. Okay, everyone. Everyone ready? Let's get on board. For this outing, we're going to use this map as our guide. It was drawn by Frank S. Haswell, who was also the county surveyor. This map was widely reproduced and sold as a postcard. Many of these include this saying added down the middle: "The place we fish and pass the dish and loiter in the wood. Now you must come and bring your chum and ramble to the good." Our first stop is going to be at Van Diemen's. It was also known as Van Diemen's Land, named for the family of John Watson Van Diemen, an early Benzie settler. What made Van Diemen's unique was its proximity to the railroad. The Ann Arbor Railroad ran ping-pong trains between Frankfort and Beulah for many years. In this schedule from 1910, we can see that the train stopped several times a day at Van Diemen's in both directions. Some of these were scheduled stops, and others were flag stops, meaning the train would stop if a flag was raised. This is from an early tourism book published in 1916 titled Benzie County, the Land of Summerland, the Summerland of Recreation and Rest. In this ad, we see cottages, $9 per week, large roomy tents, $8 per week, guests lodged in cottages, meals served in a central dining hall. We serve fresh fruit, vegetables, cream, eggs, and honey raised on our farm. It should be noted that almost all early resorts had a farm for income and to supply their guests and visitors. Besides working the farm, Van Diemen was also a carpenter, building several cottages at the resort, like this one, the Birch Cottage, and this one, the Maple Cottage, and this one, the Mansion. Here is a photo of the family home with the Van Diemens out front. In this close-up, we see John and his wife Emma and their 4 children, Alice, Myra, Harriet, and John Alden. John and Emma were married in 1862 in Ross County, Ohio. In 1868, they moved to Benzonia, along with their daughters, Alice, Myra, and Harriet. As recorded in this land warrant, John purchased 160 acres where he built his farm. And he was an early fruit farmer. He likely ran this resort as a side business, at least early on. All of the Van Diemen children received a fine education. Here is a photo from the Benzonia Academy Latin class of 1891 with John Alden in the back row. In this 1900 census record, it's notable that all three of the Van Diemen daughters were teachers. John was a Civil War veteran, having served as a corporal in the Ohio 60th Infantry. Here in this 1910 photo, John is participating in the 19th annual GAR reunion in honor, a bunch of old comrades. John died in 1920. He is buried with his military headstone in the Benzonia Township Cemetery. Emma died in 1914, and daughter Myra died in 1916. But Alice, Harriet, and John Alden kept the resort going for many years. Interestingly, none of the children were ever married. Harriet passed away in 1938. Alice passed away in 1941. John Alden in 1946. And after their passing, the resort was sold and renamed Hillendale Resort. Okay, let's move down the lake a bit, around the point, and to the outlet. Here in this early resort map, we see the mention of a congregational resort. Not much is known about this resort, although it was mentioned by George Robinson as a congregational campground just west of the outlet. There are a couple of mentions in the August 1888 Benzie Banner. The Congregationalists of Frankfort commenced to agitate the question of a summer resort at the outlet of Crystal Lake. Frankfort people organized Crystal Lake Congregational Resort Association for the purpose of pushing resort scheme at the outlet. This group was not the same that established the Congregational Summer Assembly a decade or so later. At some point, a pavilion was built at the outlet, what may have been referred to as the Outlet Inn. This is the only known photo of this resort. However, in this close-up, we can see that showing your fish catch while wearing formal attire seemed to be a popular item back then. Also near the outlet was the Mollineaux Inn, built in 1911. The inn was established by Walter Mollineaux and Winifred McIntyre Mollineaux. Walter was originally from Nassau County, New York, but by 1910, he, along with Winifred and their children, Phyllis and Bessie, were living in Chicago, Illinois. The inn was only in operation a few years when unfortunately Phyllis died of tuberculosis in 1914 at age 23. Winifred died not long after in 1920. Both are buried in Crystal Lake Township Cemetery. After their deaths, Walter moved to West Palm Beach, Florida. But his brother, Charlie Mollineaux, may have taken over and run the inn for a while. At some point, it was turned over to Mr. and Mrs. Marius Glarum of Alberta, who owned and ran Glarum's Grocery. Under their management, the Mollineaux became noted for their Sunday dinners. Here is a view of the inn from the road, which bears the name Mollineaux to this day. And here is a rare photo of the lobby of an early resort. Note the piano in the corner, which is now in the resorts exhibit at the Benzie Area Historical Museum. The Mollineaux Inn continued its remarkable run for many decades. But by 1963, it was closed and sold to new owners. It was restored in the 1980s by the Bolins, who purchased the house in 1970. As we leave Mollineaux and head west, we see Onkaonway Beach. In this 1916 Benzie tourism brochure, we see Onkaonway Beach. It is a new plat of cottages, lots, which adjoins Camp Dixie, a fine place with several cottages. The lots are beautifully located in the bay, and being near the main highway will make a fine resort location. Also mentioned is Lakeview next to Mollineaux Inn. Note the mention of Bay Point Station, which again was another stop along the Ping Pong Railroad. Now we've come to the Ottawa Resort, established by George R. Robinson in 1895. George came to Frankfort from Olivet, Michigan in 1891. In addition to developing the resort, he was also an insurance agent, a real estate agent, and is said to be Frankfort's first policeman. Here is an early photo of a camping party taken at Ottawa Resort in 1895. No, those are not tennis rackets, those are fishing nets. And yes, everyone was required to dress formally, even when camping. This beach house was the first structure to be built at the resort, also in 1895. And once again, a string of fish was a requirement for a group photo. In 1903, George married Rosella Fine, who was originally from Mount Pleasant. This photo shows George's real estate office in Frankfort. Rosella appears to be in the doorway. And here she is on the right, Frankfort's first telephone operator. Here are two colorized photos, postcards, one showing the beach and the other a view from the bluff overlooking Crystal Lake, which we all know is code word for climbing the stairs. According to Reverend Frank Lee's 1922 booklet, The Attractions of Crystal Lake and Vicinity, about the Ottawa Resort, he states, there are now 30 cottages in all, the number all the time increasing. In this 1915 map, you can see quite a few of these cottages along the beach. Also note the location of the spring and the Cold Brook itself, and the Cold Brook Inn. The inn was built around 1901 as a central dining hall. In this early photo of the dock, we can see the waterfront activities, including horseback riding in the water. I didn't even know that was a thing. Here's another view of the inn from the dock, featuring more traditional water activities. George was a great promoter, not only for the inn, but also for his real estate business. Here, the Cold Brook Inn offers special dinners and suppers, pleasant launch and auto stop on Crystal Lake, cottages for rent, with or without meals, resort supplies, soda fountain, candies, oil, gasoline, ice, wood, amusements, dancing, tennis, billiards, boating, spring water, rates $10 per week. And for sale, one of the finest lots, 100-foot lots on Crystal Lake, valuable improvements, adjoining spring water, good auto road, fine bathing, price $750. Written in 1956, George Robinson wrote one of the finest accounts of early life on Crystal Lake. In the final line, he states, I am writing all of this thinking it may help out history a little bit. George lived a long and amazing life, passing away in 1962 at the age of 97. Before we leave Ottawa Resort, let's take a look at this impressive morning catch. Now let's head down the lake a bit to Pautz Resort. Originally called Crystal Banks Resort, it is the first resort on Crystal Lake, established in 1888. It was built by Albert Eugene Banks. Born in 1846 in Shenango, New York, Banks came to Cass County in 1863. He was a lumberman and was drawn to the opportunities in Benzie County. A wagon road was cleared from Frankfort, following a brook down to the lake. This offered an advantageous location to build a resort. An article from the Benzie Banner in August 1890 states, One of the clear brooks for which northern Michigan is famous runs through the center of the grounds. And some distance back from the lake shore in this little stream, a dam has been built. Also, one very beautiful cottage is nearly cleared, and another will be erected as soon as the first is finished. Several parties are camping on the ground already. And finally, it is expected that a steamboat will be placed on the lake in a few days. In 1891, banks sold the resort to Robert Pautz, who renamed it Crystal Pautz. According to family lore, Edith Pautz, daughter of Robert and Friederike Pautz of Stuttgart, Germany, was in the U.S. teaching school and gave her father $1 to buy a lottery ticket. Apparently, he was a $15,000 sweepstakes winner, and with this money came to America and purchased the resort on Crystal Lake. Pautz did indeed come from Germany to Frankfurt, and in 1888 he became a naturalized citizen. So who knows, maybe the story is entirely true. After taking ownership, Robert got to work building cottages. He built 7 cottages at the resort, as well as a rooming house and a lakeside pavilion. One of his cottages was built entirely out of doors, as shown in this photograph. After Robert's death in 1909, the resort was operated by their son, Reinhold R. Pautz, and his wife, Anna. As noted in this 1916 advertisement, Crystal Pautz is still the finest picnic ground on the lake, having several fine brooks and ponds, fine shade and grass, good boating, bathing, fishing, and a number of cottages for rent, and a dining room and dancing pavilion. Furnished cottages to rent, board by the day or week. Speaking of picnic grounds, here is a photo from the Benzie Academy field trip there in 1904. Again, it appears everyone is overdressed for the occasion. This photo is likely the Pautz family after Robert had passed. Friederike perhaps on the left, daughter Edith sitting, Reinhold in his cap with his wife Anna and their children. Friederike Pautz died in 1929 at age 90. Shortly before Reinhold's death in 1943, the resort was sold. The resort changed hands several times over the years and is now private property. Before the Congregational Summer Assembly, there was the M.E. Resort, dating back to the 1880s. Also known as the M.E. Camp Meeting, it was essentially a campground hosting large summer gatherings. Based on these articles from the Benzie Banner, this was a popular destination. August 8, 1888, Methodist camp meeting commenced at west end of Crystal Lake. Sunday the 12th, over 1,000 people present. The scheme proved a success the first year. June 25, 1889, M.E. camp meeting commenced on Crystal Lake campgrounds, continued to July 1st. Also note that on June 22nd, the dam was at the outlet of Crystal Lake was strengthened. We don't have any photos of the M.E. Resort, but if you find some, please contact the museum. And by the way, if you're wondering, M.E. stands for Methodist Episcopal. Okay, we made it to the end of the lake. As we can see in the map, the Congregational Assembly and Crystalia can both be reached by the same boat stop. For this tour, we have so much to see that we will need to save the CSA story for another day. However, in this postcard, we can see the Pathfinder, a motor launch that was also owned by A.E. Terpening, which made regular runs between Beulah and the CSA in the early 1900s. Here is another postcard showing the Pathfinder at the dock. It appears someone has corrected the description. But it's true, the launch service was shared and at the CSA dock. Okay, let's get off the boat and go visit Crystalia. Established as a new summer resort, Crystalia was founded in 1895. It was developed by William L. Davis, who moved here from Chicago. Born in 1856, he attended Yale and began his career as an attorney. But after a first marriage, he moved to Frankfurt and started a new career as a real estate developer and resort owner. Roughing It. This brochure photo speaks to the allure of Crystal Lake, not just for its wonders, but also a way to get back to the basics, the physical challenges of a rustic life. To Crystalia on the steamer Petoskey. Crystalia, like the other resorts we are visiting, was developed before the rise of automobiles. Access was either by steamer, like the Petoskey, or by rail on the Toledo, Ann Arbor, and Northern Michigan Railway. The advantages of Crystalia. The air, cool air. The air is wonderfully vitalizing, a specific for hay fever. Good bathing, warm enough near shore for even the most delicate person to enjoy. Here is the early plat map of Crystalia from the same brochure. The long strip along the lake reads, sand and gravel beach about 400 feet wide. Lots were numbered 1 through 77. If we look at the price list, prices varied from $100 up to about $300. And then there was the hotel grounds, lot 40 at the bottom, available for $3,000. Lots 1 through 26 were shown as already sold, mostly to buyers in the Chicago camp, as listed here, along with their professions and addresses. By 1901, the plat had expanded, with additions shown here in yellow and green. Many cottages were built, especially along the beach. Many were quite substantial, with sidewalks and other amenities. This postcard from 1913 features the Beachy Vet Cottage. This is a duplex cottage, which was somewhat unique. Around 1912, there was a Crystal Lake Boat Club formed. And what better way to enjoy a gas boat than to race it? Motorboat races under the auspices of the Regatta Committee of the Crystal Lake Boat Club will be held at Crystalia, Saturday, August 7th, 1915. At the bottom of this photo, we see motorboat races, Three Pines Inn. The Three Pines Inn was built by developer William Davis in 1899. It was located at the south edge of Crystalia, where it still stands today. In this early photo, we can see the inn, its wide porch, 3 dormers, and, what do you know, 3 pine trees behind and to the left. In this close-up, we see William Davis and his family. Sitting on the steps is his second wife, Flossie, or Flora Crane, who he married in 1902, and their daughter, Nilva, born in 1906. This colorized postcard, with its prominent sign, must have been very popular, as there are many versions, all with different coloring. Again, we see the 3 pines in the background. As the resorts around it grew, the 3 Pines began to offer meals in their dining room and became known for their Sunday chicken dinners. By 1917, Will Davis began to turn the 3 Pines over to Susan and Frank Marker. Here in this early photo of Susan and Frank, Susan is holding a wonderful fan. By 1920, Will Davis and his family moved to Minnesota. That year, the 3 Pines Inn, along with several of the other lots and structures, were deeded over to Susan and Frank. As shown in this roadside photo, one of the first things they did was to add a grocery, then a bakery, and then a gas station. Although a later photo, this shows the gas pumps, signs for Kodak Film, Coca-Cola, and Western Union telegrams. I understand the Marker children earned pocket money delivering telegrams around Crystalia, perhaps to the CSA as well. The Markers eventually turned the business over to their children, Irving, Iva, and Burl, who continue to run the cottages and the inn. Their families continue to operate these properties as vacation rentals to this day. As we make our way around the northwest corner of the lake, we see several resorts that were developed in the early 1900s: Lakeview, Buena Beach, and Oberlin. Looking at the 1901 plat map, we can see that none of these were around at that time. However, we do see in the lower left property owned by A.L. Wakefield and nearby the U.S. government property where Point Betsy is located. By 1915, however, we can see there were several new resorts in this area. Wakefield's Lakeview Summer Resort was later known as Pine Ridge or simply The Ridge. In this 1907 photo, we see the bluff or the ridge. The original road is at the base of the ridge, although it's hard to see here. And the base of the ridge was the original shoreline before the lake was lowered. In this view from the bluff, looking east, we see a boathouse in the distance, which shows how far the beach extended at that time. The museum has a wonderful account of the ridge, written by Fayette B. Shaw. Beginning in 1907, there are many early photographs, including this one that we are seeing here. By the way, Buena Beach does not appear to have been platted or developed as a resort, at least to my knowledge. However, Oberlin was developed, as we see in this 1915 plat map. There were 24 lots, as well as a beachway and a park to the north. Dr. Stacy Daniels, whose parents own lots in Oberlin, informed me that when the State Road, or the Michigan Pike, or M22 went through in 1915, many of these lots were impacted. But the beachway remained under shared ownership. Located just east of Oberlin was the Piqua Handle and Manufacturing Resort, also known as Pine Bluffs, and later Chimney Corners. The visionaries behind the resort were Olin E. Rogers and his wife, Leola Rogers. Olin's family from Piqua, Ohio, owned several wood product manufacturing plants. Employing over 400 workers, they made everything from farm tools to hand tools to door handles and other hardware. As the business grew, they strategically located their plants to be close to readily available hardwood. One of these plants was in Thompsonville, as shown in this early postcard. In 1910, Olin and Leola built Pine Bluffs Cottage and began to build a farm and a new resort. Here is the Rogers family with their dog and daily catch of perch. That same year, they built a second cottage, Windermere, here in the foreground, with Pine Bluffs off to the right. Here is a wonderful interior photo of the Windermere living room and fireplace. As part of their plan, Olin and Leola developed Orchard Hills, offering cherries, currants, and apples. This article from September 15, 1910 describes a visit to the Orchard Hill farm. As mentioned in the article, the trip to Beulah was followed by a fine launch ride of 8 miles across Crystal Lake to the cottage, which is located on a high rise of ground on the north shore of Crystal Lake, affording one of the finest views imaginable. The cottage is a roomy structure of rustic design, containing, besides all the attractiveness of an ideal outing place, all the conveniences of home. Pure water is piped from a neighboring spring. An especially attractive feature of the place is a large open fireplace. Here, a dinner suitable both in quality and quantity to satisfy the appetites of an outing party was served, after which the company proceeded on a tour of inspection of the many interesting spots of the farm. A return to the cottage lunch and an enjoyable boat ride back to Beulah concluded a day long to be recalled with dearest memories by every member of the party. Because there were still no roads around the lake, the Rogers built the Carolyn, offering access for their family and guests. Note that this was a motor launch, which was easier to maintain than a steam launch, and faster too. Glen Malier was another property development located just east of Bass Bay at the newly formed Round Lake, which was formerly a bay before the lake was lowered. Behind Glen Malier were two brothers, Sola B. Dunn and Thomas B. Dunn. Born in Ireland, Thomas moved from Chicago to Frankfurt, where he started a fruit farm, together with his wife Gertrude M. and daughter Gertrude E. Later, he worked as an accountant in the railroad office. Sola was a partner in Houseman and Dunn, a manufacturer of surgical instruments in Chicago, and was likely the financial backer. This 15-page brochure from 1902, titled Paradise Regained, contains a wealth of information about their resort, including maps and other interesting details about the property and the opportunity for ownership. They spared nothing in describing the property. Here, the hot summer winds are tempered by the waters of the lake over which they pass before reaching the North Shore, so that Glen Malier enjoys, even on the hottest days, a cool and refreshing atmosphere. The brochure mentions Haley's Resort on Long Lake, shown here on our map. Haley's Farm on Long Lake is operated by Mr. Albert Haley. Here, cottagers from Glen Malier who wish to try their seductive powers on the game fish will receive the very best of attention. Mr. Haley also is prepared to supply cottagers with all the necessary supplies for table use: chickens, eggs, milk and cream, honey, vegetables, berries, all at reasonable prices. Haley's Landing was a stop on this 1915 Crystal Lake launch brochure schedule. Gertrude H. made 4 stops per day, likely at a dock near Glen Malier on Bass Bay. Unfortunately, Sola died in 1919 at age 60, and Thomas died in 1921 at age 70. As we can see here, Sola owned quite a large amount of property around Glen Malier, including Round Lake and up to Long Lake. The property was passed down to Thomas's daughter, Gertrude E. Dunn, Amos, who in the 1950s partnered with Don Marshall to develop the remainder of the original property. As we travel on the North Shore back towards Beulah, we can see 2 locations on the map: Glen Eyrie and Glen Rhoda. Glen Eyrie was founded in 1904 by Dr. Sidney Strong of Oak Park, Illinois. A graduate of the Oberlin Seminary in Ohio in 1881, 3 years later, he graduated from the Yale Divinity School. The story is told that Strong first saw Crystal Lake when he attended meetings at the Congregational Assembly at the west end of the lake, possibly as early as 1897. He was so taken with the beauty of the lake that he rode around it to find the most desirable spot for a cottage. That spot turned out to be the broad stretch of sand we call Glen Eyrie. In 1904, he purchased a large parcel of land and created 18 lakefront lots, as shown here in this 1915 plat map. Here is a 1910 list of Glen Eyrie owners by lot and date. At that time, almost every member of the was a member of the Pilgrim Congregational Church in Oak Park, Illinois. This is an early view of Glen Eyrie taken from out in the water. Note that all the cottages were built up on the bluff. No one wanted to build on the beach back then. It was too risky. Water levels fluctuated too much, and depending on the outlet dams at the time, which were mostly wooden affairs until 1913. However, boathouses were often built on the beach, like this one at Glen Eyrie, which was a prominent landmark that stood for many decades. Among the early Glen Eyrie owners were Dr. William G. Willard and Frank and Anna Kimball, again from Oak Park. Together, the Willards and the Kimballs established Crystal Lake Orchards, located just north of Glen Eyrie. This article from May 1910 describes 3 new orchard enterprises which were underway. Orchard Hills under Olin A. Rogers, who we visited earlier. A.J. Rogers Jr. with Thrushwood Orchards, not related to Olin Rogers, by the way, and Crystal Lake Orchards. Crystal Lake Orchards is the name and organization promoted by Frank Kimball, a Chicago Board of Trade man. This company has about 200 acres, which are to be set in fruit trees. Here is a photo of a group, likely all from Glen Eyrie, with their pails for picking cherries at Crystal Lake Orchards. Dayton Willard, son of Dr. William Willard, is shown here with the ladies, who seem to be doing all the work. Dayton would operate Crystal Lake Orchards until the 1970s, when the property was sold and developed as Crystal Highlands by Jim Kelly and Jack French. The museum has a copy of Gene Hillman's book, The Glen Eyrie Story. This book contains a treasure trove of stories about early summer life on Crystal Lake. Just east of Glen Eyrie is Glen Rhoda. Not a resort per se, but this was a popular early destination for lake travelers. Named by Reverend James B. Walker for his daughter Rhoda, after exploring the area with a party of ministers in 1861. As seen here, poetic license was often used to sell its virtues. A more realistic photo of the spring is on the right. Many families made trips to Glen Rhoda for, quote, rest and refreshment, including some of my own family shown here in 1906. On the left are Austin and Arthur Wolf with their wives, children, and friends who made frequent summer trips to Crystal Lake from Parkville, Missouri. My grandmother, Alice, age 5, is sitting barefoot on the right. The Wolfs purchased property just east of Glen Rhoda in 1903 and would visit here regularly. Mr. and Mrs. Charles Case operated a concession at Glen Rhoda for many years, offering food, refreshments, tables for picnic parties, boating, fishing, and camping. This postcard shows a boy drinking from the spring. On the back, he is writing to his Aunt Agnes McClure in Madison, Wisconsin in 1911. Dear Aunt Agnes, this spring is a rod or two from the edge of the farm and a quarter mile from camp. Love and best wishes from George. As we travel east, we find ourselves at Juanita Park. Juanita Park was developed by David E. Burns and Wilbur S. Burns in 1902. Their father, also named David, was a Methodist minister who settled with his wife, Lavinia, in Coldwater, Michigan, sometime prior to 1860. Here is the early plat map of this resort. David E. Burns became a lawyer and moved to Benzonia. Soon after, he purchased land together with his brother Wilbur, who lived in Grand Rapids. Juanita Park was one of the largest real estate projects on Crystal Lake, with 190 lots in the original plat. Dave also owned a farm just to the east near what is today Warren Road. David and Wilbur's sister, Helena Burns French, known as Lena, purchased a few of these lots and built Juanita Lodge in 1910. She was married to Charles French, publisher of the Holland Sentinel, and she spent her summers hosting guests at Juanita Lodge for many years. Her Juanita Lodge log contains stories about operating Juanita Lodge up through the mid-1930s. Included are guest books listing visitors and their hometowns, many from far and wide. Here is a photo of Juanita Lodge from 1910, showing how it looked in those early years. And here is a later look at Juanita Lodge when Juanita Park was operated by Warren Crispell. Part of Juanita Park was developed into a resort known as Crispell's Cottages. One of them is shown here. Later, Crispell sold to Alan and Joanne Applehoff, who eventually sold the cottages to individual owners. Today, these cottages are known as Crystal Glen. As we leave Juanita Park, here's an early wolf photo showing visitors from Benzonia rowing to the Flora, waiting at the blue line. This is our final stop. The Windermere is our next location, located in Glenwood Park. Here we are at the Hotel Windermere, situated in beautiful Glenwood Park and on Crystal Lake, the Geneva of America. Located in the northeast corner of Crystal Lake, Windermere Hotel was built in 1903. It was a large hotel for its time, with 2 stories and a large veranda. There appears to be screened porches on the upper floors in this photo, and every room had an outside entrance. And it had a nice sandy beach area. The Windermere was built and operated by Orrin L. Bristol and his wife Effie in 1903. Orrin and Effie were from Shiawassee, Michigan, where he had been a school principal and a school commissioner. Around 1900, he was hired as commissioner and superintendent of Benzie Public Schools. In 1901, he purchased 80 acres in the northeast corner of the lake and cleared enough land to build a main building along with a separate dining hall and employee quarters. Around 1911, Orrin and his family moved to Grand Rapids and they sold the hotel. It was purchased by a group of investors from Cleveland, Ohio, and it was converted to the Windermere Club. The Windermere Club operated for over 40 years, but was eventually closed and torn down in the 1950s. Okay, we finished our tour and we are back in Beulah. We'll save the story about Beulah hotels for another lecture, but now it's time for a swim. Thank you, everyone. Before we go to questions and answers, I'm going to want to thank a few people. I'd like to thank Christine Bassell for help with Mollineaux Inn, Carol and Bob Beidler for help with Pautz Resort, Jane Cooper, Congregational Summer Assembly, Carrie Foote and Carol McKee for their help with Crystalia and Three Pines Resort, Mary Rogers, Chimney Corners, Lissa and Greg Magel, Glen Malier, and the Benzie Museum Archives team, who carefully scanned and have restored the photos in this lecture. And thanks to all the volunteers and supporters who make these lectures possible. Thank you, everyone.